Welcome everybody to the Visual Content Marketing Show. I'm your host, Krishna Day. The Visual Content Marketing Show explores how to integrate visual content into your digital marketing and communications plans. And we cover trends, technology, and practical tips. Now remember that we're here and we are live streaming this, so if you're catching this as we're live, you're very welcome to leave a comment on our Google Plus event page. And if you're commenting elsewhere, I'll come back and check that. So for today, in fact, I'm actually live streaming over on LinkedIn, would you believe, trying something new over there in terms of using LinkedIn Publisher. So people may be watching the show there, and you're very welcome if you are doing watching in terms of over on LinkedIn. Now, in terms of this episode, just to cover what we're going to be exploring today, you might have heard about Inside the Actors Studio, and that's a TV series that's been reported very well across the years and across the world, and I've watched that here in Ireland. So I thought, what better way than we actually start September, but actually going inside the Hangout Studio. And today's event, I'm actually delighted that I'm joined by two people who are behind the scenes and in front of camera with the Author Hangout. And Author Hangout is all about Hangout on Air for authors, specifically around them being either self-published or independent authors, really helping them grow their business in terms of marketing their books and developing their author platform. So I'm thrilled to be able to be joined by the two people here who are making this happen, and that's Shawn Manaher and R.J. Adams. And really delighted because they've just done their first series. So the show, we'll get to know a little bit more about it in a while. The show started in February, and I've watched a number of them. And what I was really intrigued by, and why this has come to be, is that early on this year, I did a whole series with people I was calling Hangout pioneers, people who'd started to use Google Hangouts in their business, and some of them had been using them for as long as 2 years, and some people had actually just been using them for a couple of months. But I really wanted to encourage people to start to think about how they could integrate this as part of their digital communications. And then when I actually came across Shawn's work, and I enjoyed watching their episodes, but then found he was saying, that's the end of season 1. And I thought, that's really intriguing. I'd never considered thinking about my shows in seasons as you would do in terms of perhaps watching TV. So, you know, I know that there's some TV shows that I watch, and I can do a catch-up and kind of binge watch or binge view in terms of on season 1, 2, and 3, and that's being used far more now on TV in terms of encouraging people before the next series, do a catch-up, go back and watch those things. And I thought that's an interesting approach in terms of reviewing things at the end of season 1. So that's how this show came to be, and we're really going behind the Hangout Studio. So perhaps over to yourself, Shawn, and maybe tell us as we get started about how the Hangout series came to be, and what was it that prompted you to actually do this, partly I'm sure for your clients, but also to bring clients to you for lead generation and also provide great knowledge and expertise to people who are interested in the topic.
Thank you, Krishna Day, and I first want to say thank you, and I really appreciate that you're having us on the show. Any opportunity that we can share about what we're doing to help others is something that we really enjoy, and are pretty transparent around the processes and the steps that we're doing in order to grow our show. So first off, thank you for that. When it came to the Author Hangout, it was born out of a lot of experience that I was seeing on Google Plus, in that I was watching some other folks, very similar to what you're talking about, where you're watching what other pioneers are doing in Google Plus, and I saw that there was a gap within the author writer space, that there wasn't a regular show that was helping authors to define or understand how they can move from a point of, I have this book, I want to now market that book, but what do I do? And so a lot of our experience and my experience in saying, you know what, I want to start this show was seeing what other people were doing and saying, you know what, this platform of Google Plus, it has a lot of legs to it. Obviously, it's with Google. When you create a Hangout on Air, it automatically goes over to YouTube. So there's some automatic built-in processes and steps that really help to get some reach. And so, like you were saying, you know, us doing this for the purpose of lead generation and working to build an audience, that's exactly what we're doing. We're saying, I think we can get authors connected with us through this mechanism.
Well, in fact, let's just talk about the fact of the business that's behind the Author Hangout is book marketing tools, and of course people will find you at bookmarketingtools.com and also on Google Plus. And I know that, R.J., you're a prolific author yourself in terms of a number of ebooks that you've created. Perhaps you want to talk about, from your experience even as an author, what this has meant, what insights that gave you in terms of what you were about to create.
Yeah, when we first started book marketing tools, we realized that there was a gap, that authors, it's easy to self-publish your book now, and you can get it published by yourself through Amazon and some various other marketplaces, but then who's going to buy your book? If you don't have a distinct marketing strategy, no one's going to buy your book. And many authors are great writers. They can create awesome stories, but then when it comes to the business side of things, they have no clue what to do, and they're stuck. Nobody's buying their book. They're discouraged. And so Shawn and I both come from a marketing background and a business background, so that's kind of where we excel. So we realized that we could take a lot of that knowledge that we had and implement it in a few different areas, one being tools, creating tools that make marketing easier, make it so you know what you need to do, through education, through our blog posts, and the Author Hangout being one of those educational pieces that came out from those tools, and then building a community. We have a community through our email list as well as through Google Plus, and so we just really realized that there was that gap, and that many authors just could use any type of marketing information. And marketing is pretty much the same whether you're marketing ice cream or books. It's the same. You have to get people to want your product, and so so that's just kind of been what we've been doing for the last year and a half or so, just coming up with great tool ideas, coming out with different content, and the Author Hangout has been a large part of that, even though it didn't start out kind of in our thoughts and plans, but it's definitely been a huge part of it.
So let's just pause there for a moment, because my objective here today is to go behind the scenes, and I want to just pause because you've said something that not too many people get. You're clearly all about using Hangouts for business, but what you've actually identified there is you knew that your target market had a problem, and that was the objective of putting this Hangout series together. And I see a lot of people just not really wondering, what on earth am I going to be doing? You know, what should we be talking about? Who should be our guests? And we'll come on to how you select your guests and so on. My show is all about visual content marketing. Hangouts happens to be one way you can use visual content marketing. We've talked about other tools. We'll talk about other tools in the future, but I know that's what I'm trying to address. So I think for anybody who's watching, that's learning point number one for today. The guys actually identified there was an issue with the people that they were looking to support. People were producing books, are writing books, and that's a lot of work, but now how do we market the books to sell more? So have I got that right, Shawn, in terms of a good explanation of learning?
Absolutely. In good marketing is all about, number one, targeting who your market is, and what's that unique value proposition that you bring to the table that's going to help that target market. Beyond that, when you're identifying those two things, you go into what's the persona and the pain that your market is really having. And at that point in intersection is when you start to identify how you can message to them and what do you really talk about on your particular show or blog or website, whatever it might be. Because if you do all of that work ahead of time, it puts you in a position to speak directly to the people that you want to talk with. And so in terms of conversion rate, in terms of targeted market, in terms of people excited and wanting to share what you're talking about, it changes dramatically. So if an entrepreneur is out there and they're saying, yeah, I don't know really what I'm going to do and I kind of want to fly by the seat of my pants, have fun at it, but you're not going to see results. And that's not just, it's not me being mean, it's just reality is that when you do that marketing work, that the base level stuff, you're going to set yourself up for success.
So let's come in then in terms of the next stage of the process. You've identified that target market. Let's go back and explore what your learnings have been in terms of in your first series. So talk to us about the style of the show, and you and I are going to do a hangout. The three of us will do a hangout in a month or so's time, specifically on book marketing tips, because I know lots of people want to know about those things too. Yep. However, for today, let's stick with what you identified in terms of your approach for your first shows and what you learned through that.
Sure. So the first shows that we did early on, they were interesting. They were a lot of fun. I did feel like I was flying by the seat of my pants, even though we were super organized. But what I would say is early on, I had to learn to let go. Is that as much as I could plan how this should be structured and what should be talked about, I needed to let go. So if you look at the first early episodes of the Author Hangout, they were a little jittery from a quality standpoint. I didn't have the right equipment in place that really affected it, whether it was the audio or the video. And overall, I think I was trying to do more preparation, which may sound funny. I was doing so much preparation, it was actually impacting the quality of the show. And so one of the big learnings was, number one, let go. Number two was get the right equipment in place. And number three, I guess, related to it was in all that preparation, make sure that you're enjoying yourself at the same time. And that may not have come across as much as it did come across for me, but when I watched those replays, I could definitely see that could have been better. And I think, I'd like to say, that our episodes definitely got better as the season went on.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Our first shows are not always going to be our best shows. You said you were super organized, so perhaps, R.J., you can tell us about what you were doing behind the scenes to make sure that you were both very organized.
So when Shawn came up with this idea of doing a hangout for authors, I had no clue. I don't think I had even watched one. He had to point me to one to watch. I don't do too much engagement on social media. I'm kind of more behind the scenes, and Shawn's kind of the front guy. So I did a lot of research, Ronnie Bincer's stuff, and some other people's tips about doing a hangout. And so I just created a big checklist, essentially, so that we made sure we hit every point as far as what we needed to do for the pre-setup stuff, for any marketing beforehand, right before the show in the green room, right after the show, during the show, to make sure we had all of our bases covered. Because I had no clue what I was doing, I don't like that feeling of not knowing what I'm doing, so that really helped as far as getting the process to go smooth. The downside of that, and Shawn kind of touched on it, was almost like an over-preparation. We tried to incorporate way too many segments into our 30-minute show initially, and so after the first or second episode, we just started cutting stuff out and just mainly focusing on the interview. And once we were able to kind of identify some of those areas that could be cut and just what we wanted to focus on, it made things go a lot smoother, and I think it produced better shows, even though we had less stuff in there, less different segments and whatever. It gave us a lot better show in the end, as Shawn described.
And we're analytical like folks, and so what we did after the show as part of our process was we reviewed the show and watched it, because on YouTube you can take a look at the audience participation or engagement, and so we watched what happened at the key points in the show. When we did a segment, we watched to see did the engagement go up or down, and if it went down, then we said why. And if we saw a trend over a couple of them, then we say, you know what, this isn't working, so let's change that. So we dropped a couple of things. On the flip side, if something's working really well, let's continue to do that and maybe push it more forward. So early on, I think our intro was close to maybe 2.5, 3 minutes, which is pretty standard among most HOA shows. And when I started watching other programs like on TV or whatnot, and I was seeing that their introductions are like 15 seconds, 30 seconds, they're into the show, I said, well, why can't we introduce that? So we bumped up, we removed a lot of not the fluff, but a lot of the back and forth early on stuff that I think could be saved for later or a different part of the show. And so we moved it up, and we saw our engagement, go up significantly and then stay up in the show. So it really got people engaged quickly without sacrificing and making it feel like it was rushed. And so that's another thing that we could talk about, is that early on I felt like because we had so many segments, we were rushing, and we were trying to get from one point to the next, and that just didn't work.
So perhaps you can explain to us what you mean by segments, and I'm particularly intrigued because of you using this for lead generation. So what were your learnings around if there was a segment around talking about your products and your services that you have? I'm not sure if you know that.
That's a good question. So early on, we had a specific segment that was about books, and because it's the Author Hangout, and these are authors, it was a recommended books that we are sharing, and so that stuff fell flat. We didn't see any result in terms of click-through rates or people going to Amazon and buying the books, and it seemed like in the segment people dropped off during that time, and so that was at least one segment that I know for sure we said, you know what, it's just not working.
Yeah, initially, you talked about lead generation. I'll get that to a second. I'll get to that in a second. But one of the other segments we noticed was Shawn starting out, kind of reading an excerpt from a book, because once again, we're like authors. They like to write. They like to read. We thought it would be kind of a good introduction, and we just realized it wasn't hitting home like we thought it would. So we just dropped it, and that made the introduction a lot shorter, as Shawn already described. Yeah. As far as the lead generation area of it, that wasn't our main focus. Like I was talking about before, we were mainly focused on the education part of it, and then we quickly realized that the lead generation was going to be a big benefit from this show. So I'm glad that we realized that fairly early on, because we were able to capitalize on it. And we didn't do a big to-do about it. It wasn't its own segment. Just at the end of the show and about partway through the show, so 1 to 2 times in the episode, we would say, go to our website, go grab our free guide, and it's something that's helpful to our audience. So it got them to want to go get that free guide, and then they just downloaded it. And our lead generation just skyrocketed from there. We were pretty shocked for people who do marketing. It took us by surprise. And then when we were analyzing it, like Shawn was talking about, we kind of like just slapped ourselves and we're like, wow, this needs to be like the goal of the show. And once we kind of made that turn, we just kept seeing great results from that lead generation plan.
Okay, so let's look at point number 2 that I'm kind of identifying from what you talked about. You went back and you analyzed what was working. So I guess the big learning point for point number 2 would be prepared to go back. And even though you think you've got a great plan, look at your analytics and use that to help determine it. And also be prepared to experiment. Is that a fair summation, Shawn, around point number 2 for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think experimentation and analyzing the result, which then says you need to put the right tracking in. So you need to use your Google Analytics goal tracking and your sales funnel so that you clearly identify how people are engaging with you, either from the Hangout onto your website or from Hangout onto YouTube, and you can track the results there. And identifying and understanding how people are going from YouTube potentially over to your website. So all of that is very important steps in the process, because at the end of the day, if you're not measuring the result, you won't know what to improve upon, and then from there you won't know what to experiment with in the next episode or the next season. Yeah.
And I'm going to put in number 3 here, because there's, again, a couple of things that strike me. One was the fact that you offered something a couple of times in the show, which was at the top of your funnel for marketing. So you weren't asking people to invest at this stage, but obviously, however you describe it, was perceived as being very valuable. So people actually took the action to go and make a decision to make that, give you, I guess, the name and email address to get to your free resource. But the second part of it is you have terrific lower thirds. And a lower third, if you're not familiar in terms of using Hangouts, is where people have their name and their details on their screen. Now, I've got mine turned off for technical reasons. But if you take a look at RJ, just for a minute, I'm switching over to RJ, you'll see at the top he's got a really nice Twitter image there, which is the correct Twitter logo. And again, if you're going to use Twitter, you make sure you're aware of their requirements in terms of using it in media. So you've got the right logo there, and then you've got the details of your Twitter account, and then underneath has got his name and also the URL of the business. So, in fact, that could have been swapped out. I don't know if you guys ever tried that, so I'll come back to yourself, Shawn, for a minute. In just a minute, about whether you tried that, about changing your lower third partway through the show to actually give the URL of where to find your special report. So is that something you've experimented with?
I actually, we have not to include that into the mix. Now with the inclusion of the Showcase app that Google has now, we're considering, or we were considering about using that. We did decide to make some changes in season 2 on how we are going to be presenting the show, so it's going to be a little different. But yeah, I have not experimented with adding basically like a call to action right on the lower third. That's actually a really good idea. I like that.
Oh, well, you heard it here first. But no, so one of the things you can do if you've got different questions or different things you want to cover is anybody watching the show, you can use your lower third and you can have it completely blank out. It doesn't have to be as we've got there in terms of showing their face, but actually you could have it completely solid, or of course you could use a screen share, or of course the Showcase app. I've talked about the Showcase app in some other content. If you want to know more about that, then I'll make sure that there's a link to that in our notes for the show. And in fact, if all works well today, I'll even show that at the end. But who knows if I can get it to work at the end of the show. But yes, I think it's really interesting to see how you can bring people in for lead generation. And at some stage, I'm sure you're going to experiment with perhaps with paid-for programs. I don't know if that's something, Shawn, you're going to look at.
I will talk about that, but really quick, I do want to back up in you're talking about what the lead generation. I think if any entrepreneur or business is looking to do Hangouts on Air, that you need to have, and this is my inbound marketing side talking, you need to have an offer. You need to have something that they are going to, your audience, your target audience, not just anybody, they really want. And what's been a success for us, and RJ's been talking about it, was because we are giving them something that they need and want. And so when you're considering doing a show like this, if you don't have an offer somewhere in the process, if you don't have a reason for people to sign up with you, well, number one, you're not going to get leads. That's obvious. But number two, you're doing a disservice to your audience and them because, or yourself, because You want to move these folks along down your funnel, but if you don't have an offer, there's no way for that to happen. So I think the offer is key to businesses, whether service-based businesses like ourselves, to be able to get leads and get people into the sales funnel. Absolutely.
Great. So let's talk about the guests that you've had on. And I know one of the problems that many people encompass is they'd like to invite guests onto being on their show. And today was very easy because I know you both know how this stuff works. And it's not always the easiest, and they can be a real mess. I've seen some, in fact, I saw something last week where it was with a whole series of people who are very well au fait in terms of digital communications, but it completely went wrong. So it is a little bit tricky in terms of getting to use Hangouts on Air, and it does change over time as well. What did you do in terms of supporting your guests coming in to make sure that they were going to be showing themselves off to their best and they weren't going to be troubled by technology?
So part of what we did was creating like a little media kit that had some banners for them to promote the episode themselves to their audience. We created a lower third for them that had our branding on it still, but had their picture and their website address and their Twitter account as well. Instructions on how to install that, and getting any questions to them kind of ahead of time. So we quickly realized that many of the guests just weren't promoting the episode themselves. So all of the time that was being spent creating those banners and including them and including instructions for them, that was one of the things that we realized about halfway through that we could probably cut out. But we kept the lower third for them, so it those who didn't know anything about Hangouts or anything, they were able to still send people to their Twitter account and still send people to their website, and it gave us a more consistent feel throughout the episode by having a very similar lower third for them. So,
Shawn? In the process of somebody then getting on the show, R.J. And I would say R.J.'s I let the guests know, hey, we do the introductions, hey, how's things going, all that fun stuff. Make them feel welcome, make them feel like this is a good place to be. Then I let them know, hey, RJ's going to run through a checklist because we like our checklists at the Book Marketing Tools, and we said, we're going to go through a checklist. So we would talk about making sure you turn your phone off, making sure that you've reset your computer recently, no other applications open at the same time. We would go through that with them, and so by us being organized as the hosts, that I believe allowed the individuals to feel organized, feel like, oh, okay, I can breathe here. In addition, if the person we had not had them on the show before, or they were not familiar with HOAs, we would ask them to join about a half an hour beforehand so that we could take care of any technical difficulties. And I don't think we've been very fortunate because I know a lot of other shows have had a lot of issues, but for whatever reason we've been pretty lucky. We've been close a few times where it was to the last minute and we're just getting things done. But by being prepared, by setting the stage, and then we would go through the process of the questions and let them know, like RJ is saying, let them know ahead of time. But then we would, again, before we started, say, hey, is there anything that you want to cover, anything you want to talk about? Just making them feel at ease. And if they looked a little nervous, I would make sure that they were having fun at the same time before the show started, and then we would get started. So I think a lot of that has helped, and what other people could do if they're hosting a show to help their new HOA users to feel at ease.
Well, I hadn't planned that I was going to kind of try to summarize each piece as we went along, but I'm going to summarize this for point number 4, which is be prepared, particularly in terms of your guests, because not all the time are they going to be confident in terms of being on camera through Google Hangouts. In fact, some of them may not have been on camera previously, but you had some great ideas there in terms of having a checklist, and providing assets, so providing people with lower thirds and perhaps some other things that can support them, and making sure you give them plenty of time for them to come and join you in advance. So whilst the show might be starting at the top of the hour, as you heard Shawn talk about there, is have people in well in advance.
Yeah, and I think by doing those other things, like the lower thirds where we offer it, it provides consistency in branding, and then that allows people to connect. People connect. I wear blue. Almost every book marketing tools, Author Hangout, I wear blue. And so almost ever. So I say in our new season, I switched it up a little bit, but that's intentional by being blue. I know it may seem like it's just a little thing, but it is. That people connect. Oh, okay, Shawn, he's wearing something blue. You know, it's a little thing. But in getting people comfortable with the show who have not experienced before, we were very strategic in the first guest that we had on our show, because we didn't want somebody who was new to the HOAs. And so we had Jason Weiser from On Track Tips. And Jason, as we all know, is one of the most accomplished HOA show hosts out there, and he's one of those pioneers really paving the way. And so we said, let's get Jason on so that, okay, if we're off the rails, he's not going to be off the rails. He's professional. He knows what to do. He's very familiar with the platform. So if in setting things up you want to get things kicked off right, find somebody who's already been doing HOA shows. It's going to save you a lot of pressure, a lot of time, and they know what to do. They know the drill.
Yeah, that's what I did for my first series, or for my first part. So it takes just one lot of pressure off, because you know that somebody's confident themselves in terms of using the tool. And as a guest, it's actually easier to be on a show and let the people who are hosting it. And the fact that there's two of you there, I think, is another great tip. So let's look in terms of moving on to in terms. Actually, I should say one thing I noticed there. You just gave a little kind of teaser. We need to be watching your next series, don't we? Because you said you're going to change it up in terms of what you're going to be wearing. That's like a little pre-roll, isn't it?
Yeah, the season 2 is going to be really exciting. We're leading off and trying to get more guests that are going to connect with the author audience that we have. And so I think I'm pretty excited about the guests that we have. We actually landed somebody, I won't say who it is, but we landed somebody that we've been after since we started the Author Hangout. And then R.J. did his ninja skills and getting this person signed up with us to do the show. But we're pretty excited about that season 2. Yeah.
So I like the fact that you just kind of put in there. So we're going to have to all watch out. This is like a little teaser like you have on TV, or a trailer saying watch out for the new series. So perhaps you can talk a little bit about what you've decided to do, and amongst that, I know you're thinking about a different formats, and I don't want you to give everything away, but perhaps you can, though, give us some ideas about what you took into consideration for actually as you move into season 2.
Yeah. R.J., do you want to tackle this?
Yeah. One of the main things we noticed was that when you pick a time frame for the live shows, it has to be done pretty much at that time. And there's a lot of people, for whatever reason, that just can't be there at that specific time. And so there's a ton of effort, a ton of energy, a lot of stuff that was focused onto that very specific live event that only a handful of people were able to watch. And we had some people who were able to watch us every single episode, and having those kind of fans there was great. But there was just a ton of work that went into that live episode. We kind of talked about it before as well, that there's a lot of technical issues, and when you're doing a live episode and you want to go live at the top of the hour, those technical issues need to be resolved, or else they're going to carry over into the show. And so that was a lot of stress and a lot of pressure, especially when cameras weren't working, or mics weren't working, or lower thirds, or whatever the case was. There was just a lot of technical aspects that created a lot of pressure for that live show. And so we kind of looked at it, and while the live show is great and we liked it, and there's a lot of energy that kind of comes from that live show, we wondered, what if we didn't do a live show? What if we just used the Google Hangout interface so that we could get all that stuff like the syndication to YouTube, the lower thirds, all of those great aspects of it, but just record the shows when we're able to, because we realized a lot of our guests weren't able to be on our show at our specific time. Sometimes they're across the pond, sometimes school, one of our guests was a teacher, and she wasn't able to be a guest because she had to be at school and didn't want to take a sick day just to do an interview. So there was a lot of complications with having a live show at a set time, and so we decided to go with recording the interviews, and we're just going to go podcast only, syndicate it to YouTube, and feature it on our blog. So it'll still look the same as far as the assets that are created from the episode, but without all the pressure and potential glitches and errors that come about from having that live show and all the pressure of needing to be ready at that top of the hour for the show to go live.
But to kick things off and to kind of add some, okay, the season is starting and we're getting things rolled out, we're actually toying around with trying to, still up in the air, is doing a live first episode, kicking off the season, letting people know what they could expect, because actually we already have 3/4 of season 2 recorded. We've already sat down and interviewed, I don't know how many people we have already. And so by having those, we've already had these great interviews. We can then, talking about tease out in the first season, that first episode, to say, hey, this is the kickoff for the season. These are some of the things that you can look forward to, and we're looking to do that. But also by having all of that stuff, that technical stuff resolved, it does allow us to be a little bit more creative in terms of using video editing software to add in the promotions that we want to share, and adding the taglines, or whatever, if there's a blooper reel that we're going to do, whatever it might be, we can make it more creative and be more like video creators versus being pigeonholed, not in a bad way, but just focus that here's the live episode and that's what you get. So we're kind of trying to test the envelope and see what's going to work with our audience.
And and that just kind of goes to our experimentation. This might fall flat, and we might go back to all live episodes for the next season. So far, there's been a lot of good stuff. All the good that we thought might happen from this process has really shown through. Huge. And allowed us to get interviews that we just couldn't get before because of the time slot. But it's all about experimenting, and this might not work out. We might not get as much measured engagement because we don't have that live episode. And even though we were only getting about 40 people per episode watching, those 40 people were hardcore fans, and so if we kind of lose out on some of that excitement, there might be some downsides to that. So it's all about, like we were talking about before, testing and measuring, seeing what works, and if this new way of doing it kind of works better, then we're just going to put all of our chips in and see how we can even improve that. But if it doesn't, then we'll switch it back up and go back to how season 1 was, and so we plan on having many, many, many more episodes. So if these 10 or 12 for season 2 don't go over as well as we had hoped, then we'll switch it up and for the ones going forward from there.
And perhaps you can just talk about your repurposing into a podcast, how you went about doing that, and the tools that you've used to do that.
Wow. So when we first started, we thought it was all about the live episode, that live event, getting everything ready, getting people there. I really had no idea or clue how awesome the repurposing from the Hangouts would be. We've been able to create a podcast. We stripped the audio from the recorded Hangout, and then we add a bumper to it, an intro, and a conclusion to it, just using free software like Audacity. And then we used libsyn.com to host the files. You can only upload a certain number of megabytes per month based on which plan you have, but then after that month, they're hosted free forever, and there's no bandwidth charges, so it's a pretty fixed fee. You know what you're getting with Libsyn. So those are some of the tools we use for syndicating the podcasts. Once the episodes were done, we optimized them on YouTube. We added in clickable annotations. We fixed the description to make it better, including some of our keywords, so that we ranked better in YouTube for a lot of the information that came out in the episode, because sometimes the episodes go in a different direction than you initially thought, and so you can get some additional keywords and additional information in there afterwards. So we use that YouTube syndication that's automatic from the Hangouts as one of our repurposing areas. We created a blog post that kind of wrote up the key points of the episodes, so that we had some physical content, and for the people who would just prefer to read about the episode. We also created some images with some of the top quotes from that were able to be shared on Twitter and Google Plus and Pinterest, in our emails. And then some of the information we use to create our emails that go out to our list. If there was a good segment of a tip or something from somebody, we took that tip and created an email out of it, and then that served two purposes. One, it was great content for our email that was already created from the Hangout, plus it drove people to go watch the rest of the episode because it was a great tip. And so all of that stuff was not in our minds, at least not my mind, when we created the Author Hangout, but all of that awesome and amazing content that we're now able to use and reuse, which Shawn will talk about kind of here in a second, but that's been a huge area of content creation for us, just from each episode.
Yeah, and I was looking at all the areas that we repurposed that RJ was talking about. The end result, all that's good stuff, and that we're doing, the repurposing, the blog and the podcast, the social media, the images, the quotes, and all that sort of fun stuff. And what the end result is that when we were doing the Author Hangout live, and we were doing it from February 18th to June 24th, that February, whatever number of months that was, 4, I think, we saw engagement between 3 and 12 new authors subscribing to our offer. Since we've stopped in June, and we still are we're broadcasting by way of blogs, we're not doing podcasts because they're not live. We're still sharing things via Twitter, Facebook, still doing things by email. So this is all content that's already been produced over the course of a period of time, and we're repurposing it, rewriting it, and using it for that. We are getting more. We have more traffic now than we did when we were doing this live before. So our traffic has actually increased, and this past month was the highest traffic that we've had since we started. And so that, to me, shows that repurposing content is where it's at. The live show, as much as I love live shows, that's not the end game. The end game is to repurpose and repurpose and repurpose until you can't repurpose anymore, and then from there give people a way to connect with you at every case. So at the end of our show, we tell them to go to get the free guide, get the free guide, get the free guide. Everybody knows about this guide, Book Marketing Tools Guide. We have close to 1,400 authors that have signed up for it since we started. So that whole process, repurposing, is fantastic. I would recommend that anybody who is in the middle of a show, starting the show, whatever, to make sure that you go through that, blogs, the transcriptions, the podcasts, the quotes, and everything that we've been talking about. Absolutely.
So another summation here for me is, in fact, there's several things in this, but again, it's back to that piece on experimentation. Don't think that Hangouts on Air only have to be in a certain format. In fact, they don't have to be publicly broadcast. So what the guys are going to be doing is actually moving it from being publicly broadcast to now still using Hangouts on Air, but it's going to be restricted in terms of who gets the replay of that initially when it goes to YouTube, and then taking it from there, adding some additional things. They're going to test and see if that works for them, which will continue to add to the production. So we heard about some of the things that they're going to perhaps put into that. And then also thinking about not just when the event's over, but also about how you can use that content. It's also about getting more views to that over time, and most of us will find that we get more people watching our content after an event. I know I can't watch everything on TV that I'd like to watch. I can't watch all the Hangouts I want to watch, and I've got a whole list of things that I'll go back to replay. I've got lots of podcasts on my phone that I want to go back and listen to, but I might even go back to them, and in particular if it's evergreen content, then I can go back to them months later when I've got that space to do so. So I think, is that a good summation, Shawn, about being prepared to experiment again?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know what? You don't have anything to lose. You know, when you're starting out, and even if you have a big audience, try things out. And if your audience is fickle and they're going to get upset, they won't get upset. Just know that they won't. If you try things and you let them know, hey, we're going to try this out, they'll love it. They'll be like, hey, I'm on board. But if you just switch things without telling people, that's when they kind of can get a little bit fuzzy there. So, yeah.
And I should just add that I personally don't have a show that's always going to be at a certain time of day, and I chose not to do that because I want to accommodate the fact that sometimes, as we heard, your guests may not be available because of time zones or travel or whatever reason. And it's great that, Shawn, you tried to have a show that was going to be consistently at a period of time, but I think that's really challenging because then it can mean that we're not flexible to get the guests, and it sounds as though by changing your mix around and the way that you're going to do the shows, that you've been able to secure some guests that you couldn't have done before.
Yeah, and what it also does, it actually frees you up if you start to get known as an expert within a particular niche. Well, guess what? I can do shows like this, and you can get the word out more because this is actually in a time slot on Tuesdays that we normally are talking with people about book marketing tools. And so that frees up for other opportunities for you as a host or as a business owner. So yeah.
Okay, so you've been fantastic in terms of the advice and guidance you've given people during the course of our time together. I can't wait to have you back on another show specifically to talk about book marketing. But perhaps you can let us know, R.J., about what's the best way for people to find out more about your new series, how they can subscribe to the new series so they can see the things that we've been talking about in action.
So you can go to theauthorhangout.com and you'll be sent to our Book Marketing Tools blog that has all of our Author Hangout blog posts. Within the blog post, you can listen to the podcast audio, you can watch the video, you can see the blog post write-up, and you can see the images that we created from there, all in one single post. So theauthorhangout.com to see us there. Shawn?
Yeah, and then on the right-hand side, you're going to see it's called Free Author Checklist for Book Marketing Online. Fill out your first, last name, and email address, and click Get the Free Guide, and then that's how you can get connected with us for the weekly tips that we're providing you on Tuesdays for your book marketing.
Excellent. And then, Shawn, perhaps just finally give us one thing that, in fact, you wish you'd known, maybe a mistake that you made in terms of when you were first starting off with your Hangouts back at the beginning of this year, that if you'd had the wisdom, you would have changed it up right at the beginning.
That's a good question. I think I would have more of them. I think I would do more Hangouts on Air. RJ's like, oh gosh, we don't want to do more. But I think what we miss out, because we did a series that was every other week, so every other Tuesday. So I think I would have said, you know what, let's just go for it and do one every week. And I think that would have just multiplied the content, the blog posts, all that sort of stuff that would have really helped out. In terms of failings, I think that early on I thought it was all about me, and that was pretty egocentric for me, but really at the end of the day, people want to get to the guests that we have, and therefore if I was to do it all over again, I would make sure that I promote and make sure that it's all about the guests and the experts that we have on the show.
Well, thank you so much for being a terrific guest on this show and giving people lots to think about in terms of perhaps they're just starting off considering using Google Hangouts. You've given them lots of ways that they can consider doing that publicly or privately in terms of, as we're going to see in Season 2 from you. And I really appreciated you joining us. So remember, go over to Book Marketing Tips to see there Shawn. You can see he's on screen now. You can see he's on Twitter as well. BKMKTING, I think, is the Twitter account there. And of course you'll find book marketing tools over on Google Plus as well. So just as I always like to do at the end of the show, I want to just wrap up with a few final thoughts for you. So in terms of just looking at what you've learnt today, I just like to think about what we can have seen in terms of what you've covered, what we've covered here about what we can adopt, adapt, and apply in terms of the ideas. There's such a lot of content. This definitely demands a replay and segmenting this up. There's a lot of work that would actually come about as a result of the things that we've covered today. So I wouldn't underestimate the time that goes into creating graphics and blog posts and editing of podcasts and all those other things. So we're not suggesting this is going to be an easy thing for you to do, but you've heard how the guys have actually experienced a great significant shift in terms of lead generation for their business. And what's intriguing is about how that continued to happen even when the show wasn't live, all because of their repurposing. So what could you adopt from the ideas that we shared today? What could you adapt, and what could you apply? Our guests always give their time for free, and so please let us know if you decide to take any of these ideas on board, and we'd love to hear about your success. So come back and let us know. We'd love to see that. I also just want to let you know, in case you're not aware, I actually now provide support around Google Hangouts for Business. And for a limited period of time, I'm not sure how long we're going to do this for, but if you're interested in using Google Hangouts for your business, I am doing this. There's a free first session. So if you're at that early stage, or in fact, if you've been established for some time, but you're still got some questions about using Hangouts in your organization, you can find my free session there. As I said, if you listen to this, in several months' time, I may not have a free session there on Google, over on Google Hangouts, all about using Hangouts for Business. But if you go to helpoutsformarketing.com, helpoutsformarketing.com, you'll see the different topics I cover there. One is specifically on using Google Hangouts in your organization. And remember, if you'd like to keep in touch with us about our future episodes, you can come over to visualcontentmarketingshow.com. So thank you, everybody, for being with us here. Thank you specifically to Shawn and to R.J. for sharing their insights. I love the fact that they broke it down in terms of what they learned from Season 1. I'm looking forward to, perhaps you'll come back to and be with us, guys, if Hangouts are in a different format when we get to Season 10. Who knows what we're going to see in the future. But thank you, everybody, for being with us here. I really wish you every success in terms of using this great, powerful, and free tool in terms of supporting you in your business with your lead generation, your marketing, and all of the other ways that you could use Google Hangouts. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.